What's interesting about the modest fashion industry, which has really gained a lot of momentum in the last 5 years or so, it's the one segment in fashion that's really driven by women. The fashion industry, like mainstream fashion, is driven very much by men, for women, and the modest fashion, which is predominantly Muslim women, is really dominated by women, for women, right? And so that's part of the reason I like being a part of it too, is because we can kind of set the stage, we can define what we want to look like, how we want to dress, right? And it's interesting because when I talk to people about modest fashion, especially people that are not Muslim or don't necessarily think about modest fashion, I get this weird reaction sometimes from women. It's like, well, what does that mean? It's almost like a little bit defensive, like, well, what do you mean modest fashion? And what I like is that modest fashion is defined as like what you define it as. It doesn't necessarily mean the hijab. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have your arm, I mean, fashion designers are going to design based on if they want to characterize themselves as modest fashion designers, then they do that, right? And maybe that's just, you know, a more of a buttoned-up neckline. It's not showing cleavage. Maybe it's longer skirts and not necessarily minis, right? So it's there's enough flexibility in that, and I appreciate that too, even though I define myself as a modest, you know, and I try not to be prescriptive either. I mean, a lot of my customers, they wear the hijab, and some are, I say like hijabi, no hijabi, and in between jabi. So it's like, right, at the end of the day, it's not about like me defining what is proper hijab, right? And I think some of this goes to me too, just because I'm trying to create this safe space, because I've worked in so many places that I didn't feel were safe.
And regardless, as you mentioned, it doesn't matter what you're wearing, right? Like you're still gonna have a scarf off and still be harassed. So
the Me Too movement, a very, very important movement, no doubt. From a Muslim woman's point of view, how do we make sure that this leads to a tangible change rather than becoming vindictive and vengeance?
Wow. So we're going to solve the world's problems. Is that what you're saying? I don't know. I have a unique perspective, maybe because I spent 20 years in corporate America, primarily in B2B sales, and was laid off a year ago. And I can say honestly that in the 20 years that I was in corporate America, the last firm that I worked in was the only place that I worked where I was not either sexually harassed or harassed for being a Muslim, or both. Wow. So, and some of those organizations that I worked with were focused on things like HR and not-for-profit and places like that, where you would think that those things don't exist, right? Or that we are such a progressive society now that, you know, it's an equal playing field for women. Like I hear this from, you know, certain people that it's, you know, times are so much better, and maybe they are, but if I can look back at my career and say that I spent so long working in corporate America and had those same issues. And that's a lot of why I haven't gone back in the last year. I've been focused on my modest fashion brand because I like creating a safe space for women, which is also why I'm doing the party this weekend for women in our community, Arabian Nights. But sadly, maybe we've come as a society a little bit further, but it also feels like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And I know we talked about that in another context last time. But yeah, I mean, the last firm I worked with, which is a great consulting firm, it was very inclusive of all kinds of different people, all kinds of different backgrounds, and that's the first place that I've ever worked where I felt like I was respected for being a Muslim, for being a woman. But then when you get older and experienced and you're like, this is not okay.
You just know your place in the world.
This culture exists is that men have their little brotherhood and they're like, oh yeah, you do it, and then maybe next month I'll do it, and I have your back, you have my back.
No, but so it's not even that, honestly, it's not even that blatant, not to interrupt you. It's literally not that blatant. I told our CEO at the time that what this guy said to me, and then he hired him back as a consultant.
Oh yeah, it's not anything.
It doesn't even have to be. It's a bro culture.
Yeah.
And that's why they're, you know, it's hard to move that needle.
Right.